Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program today, Assemblyman Mike Norris. Mike Norris represents the 144th Assembly District in New York State. That's an assembly district that includes Erie, Niagara, and Orleans counties. We want to thank you folks across Western New York for tuning in. Mike Norris, it's always nice to see you.
Good to see you, Mike. Thank you for having me today.
We've got some local events that we're going to be talking about, things that very specific of interest to the people that you represent in the 144th Assembly District. But we're going to continue on to start off our program with our discussion from last time. I think there were some things we didn't quite get to, some unfinished business as it pertains to the recently concluded state budget process. A lot of your reaction last time centered around the idea that this budget was maybe just a little bit too big.
It is too big. Again, it's $168.23 billion. I mean, that amounts to $9,500 per New Yorker. The fact of the matter is, in New York, we are just spending way too much. I'll give you an example. For Medicaid services alone across the state of New York, we are spending $72 billion. That's nearly 40% of the overall budget. That is way too much money. When I'm back in the district and I'm speaking either at the volunteer fire companies, I'm meeting with the Rotary clubs, with the business community, they remind me that people are leaving the city of New York. They are walking with their feet. And since 2010, we have lost over 1 million people in the city of New York for other climates, for other places where there's better job opportunities, there's better job growth, and there's less taxes. And the fact of the matter is we need to reduce spending in the state of New York, and we need to cut taxes. People are leaving because they cannot afford to live here. It's not because they're leaving. They want to stay here. They want to be here with their families. This is where their roots are. I mean, I was at an event the other day. I asked the whole crowd, has anyone here lost someone to another place? They all raised their hand. And we've all been affected by that, and they don't want to go. But spending is way too high in New York. And this budget is an example of the spending is out of control in the city of New York. I'll give you an example on a tax surcharge that occurred. It was in the opioid area. They're going to surcharge now the opioids, and I have no problem with a surcharge that will go towards treatment services because it is a crisis in the city of New York, our drug overdoses with heroin and so forth. But 90% of that, 90 million, will be swept back into the general fund to provide services. So only 10 million will actually go to the treatment that is needed to combat the situation. That's a problem.
We've seen that in other areas in New York State over the years where officials will set up what's known as a dedicated fund. And there's one, I guess, probably the most famous example of that is the state lottery monies and how those monies all go to education. Well, they do, but they don't because they go into the general fund, and it said that those monies go into pay for education, but it's not like it's like you give $1 for a lottery ticket and you know that that's going right into the education budget.
Well, that's right. And for example, the NIPA sweeps, my district is not far from the New York State Power Authority there in Niagara Falls. And a portion of the ratepayers' money that's going back is swept again into the general fund. That's just wrong. It should be going back to lower the cost of power on the businesses and those users that are being used, not being swept in the general fund for programs primarily in New York City. Upstate New York needs to have a stronger voice, and we need to do our investment in infrastructure and in education. If you drive around my district, the roads are in very bad shape. And we had a tough winter, there's no doubt about that. But the role of state government, I believe, is to provide strong infrastructure, place our money into that, vocational training for job, to get people back to work. These are the types of topics and areas that I think we should be investing in and not just spending on all these Medicaid programs.
Well, you talk about the roads, too. They had that one year, too, a dedicated highway fund. Same thing, the monies went in, but it really was just supplanting other monies in the general fund, and it all kind of got mixed up into a gray area and where the money was going one place or another. and people were still complaining about roads. I can tell you that right now.
And they're complaining to this day. I had many calls over the weekend about the roads. The good news is, in terms of the state budget, we were able to restore CHIP funding and then provide the extreme winter recovery money, so the monies will start flowing in that area. That's a positive part of the state budget that I fought very hard for. We've also improved our bridge funding as well and our Pave New York program and adding additional monies in there. So we understand the problem. Unfortunately, there won't be enough money, I'm sure, to fix all the roads out there, but between our partnerships with our local government, I'm sure we'll do the best that we very can.
The other good news is that now that we are into the month of May, finally, I think we can say spring is here. We're getting some good temperatures, some good weather. That means your local highway crews can be out. Some of those potholes are going to get filled, and some of the road projects are going to get started that we've been waiting for a long time in some parts of the state.
Yes, they will be, and I also encourage everyone to be very cautious around our road workers. Right. They're out there in very tough situations with all the traffic, so they do a great job, our highway crews, and just make sure use caution when you're on the roadways.
Back to the subject of state spending.
Yes.
Western New Yorkers know all too well some of the controversy and some of the criticism that's been levied on how the state is trying to attract business to come into New York, especially Western New York. We can talk for several programs solid about the Buffalo Billions and how that's working out. But in general, for all the state, there are still these questions and criticisms. We've seen a trial recently with members of the governor's administration on procurement of some of these funds, some of the contracts, how they are let out to the people who are going to provide the services, and that there's been some corruption involved. And we got through this entire budget process knowing all that, and I really didn't see much by way of change.
I didn't see one part of the budget which addressed procurement reform, and that's very, very important to me. I'm the author of the State Contract Sunlight Act to provide open and transparency to the economic programs that are occurring. I've often said I think we need to have investment in Western New York with the Buffalo Billion. It was $1.4 billion. I do question that we give a lot of money to one particular project. I believe it was like $750 million for one project. When I have businesses within the 144th District in Niagara, Erie, and Orleans counties that have told me if you could give us a $5 million investment, we could ensure that we're going to retain the 300 good-paying jobs that we have in our community. That makes common sense to me. I think that's something that the governor should look at going forward and doing these programs, is making sure we retain our existing businesses. We provide the incentives to keep there. Many of these companies have been around for 100 years, and if we can just reinvest in them, making sure the product is up to the technology standards, that will be a good thing going forward. But beyond that, when you give out these types of dollars, state funding, there should be complete oversight and openness and transparency in them. For example, if you're going to say, I'm going to create 100 new jobs, then you should have proof that we have created 100 new jobs. How are these contracts being let out for these major projects? What is the procurement process like? This should all go into a database. It should be all open for public inspection, and it should be done on the up and up. And I believe strongly that we need to continue to fight for real procurement reform to make sure these economic programs are not just being let out in a particular way, but the results are also being obtained from what those companies and those leaders and their businesses promised the city of New York that they would return. And then there should be sanctions on those, and there should be clawbacks on those. If you don't perform to exactly what you said you're going to do, then there should be accountability on the back end as well.
People watching this program may not be aware, but in the Syracuse area right now, there's a factory that sits there completely empty that was built with, I believe, $90 million in funding in an agreement with a company saying that, okay, you're going to come to New York, you're going to bring 100 plus jobs, and this is going to be great. We will help you build your facility. So everything was great until the company decided, I'm having second thoughts, not going to come. And so there sits the building, there sits the facility, vacant, unused. The state can't find anybody to move in. I mean, how do you explain that to people? How do you not have some kind of an agreement or something in writing that says, no, you've committed, you got to come, we've done this? I mean, it's just questionable. How can the state of New York be so dumb?
Well, that's what I continue to fight for in the State Contract Sunlight Act and in other mechanisms to make sure that we have the ironclad provisions in place. So when we do these types of projects, we incentivize these businesses that they actually, number one, when they build it, everything is done in the most open and transparent way. So there's competitive bidding. Everything is done so everyone has an opportunity to bid on the project and be let out in a proper way. And then once it's built, we make sure we have the clawback provisions where we can go after these companies, we can go after these corporations to obtain back the investment that we, the taxpayers, your money. It's not my money, it's not the governor's money. This is your money out there. I remember that every time I go in the chamber, that it is the taxpayers' money. These dollars that are being spent are your money. And so it's our job, and it's the governor's job, to make sure these companies, when we give out those incentive packages, make sure that the results are had as promised by those companies.
In our last few minutes here, we talked in our last program about Recruitment New York, and that is getting more people interested in helping the volunteer fire services in their area. And you were telling me that here in Albany, there is a possible law that might actually go towards getting some of that accomplished.
Yes, I mean it's a bill that we've put into place for debate to go forward, and we hope that the speaker will take up this bill because it's very, very important to the volunteer fire companies and to the members back home. I was again just over the weekend at the Middleport Volunteer Fire Company. They had their installation dinner, installed their new officers, and what I was most pleased to see were that there were many young volunteer firefighters stepping up. There was 2 tables of these young volunteer firefighters. When I gave my remarks, I mentioned it, and I thanked them because they truly are our future, and it's great to see that they're getting involved with our communities and our volunteer fire service. It saves taxpayers between $3 and $4 billion a year statewide, the service that they provide us. And I'm just so grateful to them. I have over 25 in my district, and I'm so proud to work with them cooperatively. But in this bill and the Omnibus Emergency Services Incentive Act, sponsored by Assemblyman Phil Palmisano, there's 3 particular things that would go into effect if we can just keep working on this particular bill to make it law. One is when fire insurance is collected by the businesses, paid for by the businesses, the homeowners, it goes into this fund. If a portion of that money could go back into recruitment services to enhance more recruitment within our communities. Secondly, if a volunteer firefighter uses their vehicle for the purposes of working as a volunteer fireman or woman, they would be able to get their registration fees paid for by the city of New York. They would be waived because their car or their truck is being used for the volunteer fire service. And then third, it would also be to create a tuition incentive program where we could actually have a loan forgiveness program. If someone goes to college and they're working in a particular area, then we could actually have some of those loans forgiven as an incentive to join the volunteer fire service. So it's a great bill sponsored by Phil Palmisano. It's passed the Senate with Senator O'Mara, and I hope that we can continue to fight to bring that to the floor for a vote in the New York City Assembly.
You'll let us know how that makes its way through the legislative process here in Albany.
I certainly will.
We've got about 30 seconds.
Great.
You just mentioned Assemblyman Palmisano. He's very big on organ donation, wants to let people. How can people who are watching this program become part of organ donation in New York State?
Organ donation is so important. Right now, unfortunately, New York rates near the bottom of all the states in the city of New York. You can save up to 8 lives with 1 organ donation, and you can do this by when you go down to the DMV and register for your license. You can when you renew your license, you can sign on there, or you can also go to donatelife.ny.gov. Donatelife.ny.gov. This is a very important issue, and I encourage you to please become an organ donor.
Assemblyman Mike Norris, we're out of time. Thanks for joining us today. Always a pleasure to have you folks stop by. Thanks for joining us. We'll hope to see you soon for our next Assembly Calendar.